Hello, my name is Diane Marks. I'm the Senior Instructional Designer in Digital Learning here at FGCU, and it's about that time. We're getting lots of questions about finals. So many of you have seated finals where you hand students either a Scantron or a paper copy of the quiz or exam, and they complete it, turn it into you, and then they leave. But with all of us teaching remotely, it's time to start thinking about how you're going to move that seated exam online in Canvas. So this is a little overview of what your options are. At the end of the slideshow, there's a link to some resources that give you more specifics. You can dive a little deeper. And then finally, if you have specific questions about your context, your class, your students, your discipline, please call your instructional designer. We're happy to work with you on this. So let's go ahead and get started. What will you learn for this workshop? Well, this workshop is going to show you all the options of the Canvas quizzing tool that will help you deliver an online assessment. Since many of you don't teach online and haven't given online assessments, we also felt it would be a good idea just to give you some of the best practices for delivering an online exam so that we can set you and your students up for success. The biggest question we get about these online exams is academic integrity. And so we'll talk a little bit about what your options are there and some of the pros and cons so that you can make an informed decision. The first thing we're going to look at is all of your options. What are the settings that you can make in your online exam that will help your students to succeed?
Online canvassing tool. The first thing you want to do is you'll want to create a quiz. So this is my sandbox, and you can always start in your sandbox and then import it into your course, or you can start it in your course. So you have those two choices to start with. Then you just look down your navigation ribbon here, and you're going to click on quizzes. You're going to add a quiz. And then it gives you all of these options. So let's talk a little bit about your options. First thing is you want to name your quiz and make sure that your quiz is named exactly as it's named in your syllabus so there's no confusion with students. You'll want to give some instructions here to students. This is a good place for you to add how much time they have, how many attempts they have, what kind of content will it cover, chapters 1 through 6, it will cover, it's a cumulative test, it's a quiz on chapter 5, whatever it is, it's a good idea just to give the students a little bit of a heads up here. Then you can decide if it's going to be a graded quiz or not. It might be just a practice quiz, it might be a graded survey or an ungraded survey. If you're using this for an exam, then it's going to be a graded quiz. Then you'll want to choose what group it goes into. In your assignments, you probably have some weighted groups. And in those weighted groups, you'll have your final exam or whatever quiz this is going to be. Make sure that you toggle and select that category so that the grades go into the right place. Then you have some other options here. You can shuffle the answers. How much time do you want to give? And we're going to go into more detail for each and every one of these, but this is just where you set it up. If you want them to have more than one attempt, you can identify which score to keep, how many attempts you want them to have. This is another place where you have a lot of decisions to make. Do you want students to see their responses? When will they see their responses? How much should they see? Should they see the correct answers or just the wrong answers? Should they see nothing? Again, we're going to go over all of these in detail in best practices. You also have the option here to show one question at a time for students. You can require an access code or filter IP addresses. Sometimes there's an access code, but generally it's just one more layer of confusion for students at this point. And then here you'll want to assign it. Right now I have it set to assign to everybody. What day is it due? And what time? When will it open for students to begin to take it? And when will it close, where they're unable to take it again? So these are a bunch of questions you can Discuss with other people who are teaching the same course, or just think about yourself. If you're teaching a face-to-face seated course, sometimes faculty right now are opening it at the beginning of the course class time and closing it at the end of the course class time if they would be taking it in class. Just one idea. And then here, add, we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. You can add students who need to take it on another day. If you have a student who is unable to take it on the day that you want everyone to take it, you can add that student. And you give them a different due date. So there's lots of flexibility here. All right, and when you're done, you just go ahead and save.
All right, so that's a little bit about the settings that we'll be using in Canvas quizzing. You can also have lots of options for the questions. So again, we're going to just go briefly over what your options are for all the different types of questions and how students see the answers and reveal the scores. There's more detail at the end in those resources. So this is just an overview.
Now we're going to talk about questions. So we're going to move to the next tab, questions. You'll write the title of your question here and make sure that it's descriptive so that you know sort of how to identify that question. You'll also put your points in here. Unlike assignments in Canvas, in the quiz function, your points create the total points for the whole assignment. So it might be 2 points. The other day I had somebody who had an odd number of questions and they needed it to add up to 100, so it ended up being 2.33. You can do that too. When you have matching and multiple choice, you can do partial credit for the answers if there's multiple answers. Very, very flexible. The types of questions that you can have, there are a plethora of them. This is where you'll type in your question. And then this is where you'll type in your answer. So it might be blue, orange, and then I need another answer. This one might be red, and then another answer. This one might be green. And then the correct answer is going to be red. So you see how it defaults to this first one. What you'll do is hover your mouse outside the correct answer, click on the arrow, and that moves it to be the correct answer. So I have my question, I have my points, the correct answer. I'm going to update my question. Just a couple of things to think about as you choose what kind of questions you're having in the Canvas quizzing tool. If you have a fill in the blank, the tool will grade for you. However, it's very particular about spelling in capital letters. You have the option to type in every which way you think students might spell that word. But if somebody spells it differently or uses a different capital letter or not a capital letter, it will mark it wrong. So you want to make sure you tell students that spelling and capital letters count. It's a great way to be really rigorous about do they know what the word is and how to spell it. Also down here for an essay question, the quizzing tool will not grade the essay question. It will grade all of the other questions that are true, false, multiple choice, and then leave the essay question for you. You'll grade that in SpeedGrader where you can add comments for students and then you can put in the points. Partial points are allowed, so it's just like as if you were grading it on the paper. And when you enter that final score for the essay question, then the Canvas tool will send that final score into the grade book for students to see. So you have lots of options here for questions. When you're all done, you'll update the question. Now, the next part of questions is where we're going to talk about question groups and question banks.
All right, so moving on to question groups and question banks.
Now we're going to talk.
Before we talk about question banks and question groups, let's talk about a really fast way you can get your written test up in Canvas without having to put in every single answer and every single question. So we have a software called Respondus Test Generator, and if you have your exam as a Word document, or if you can turn it into a Word document, there's a little format right here, and you'll indicate the correct answer, the title here, the question, and we can upload it into the software and it will send it into Canvas as a quiz for you. So don't worry about having to input all your questions. Just contact your instructional designer and I'd be happy to help you get that onto Canvas, and then all you have to do is set your settings so you won't have to do all that hard work. So moving on, question banks and question groups. So question banks are sort of like a big box, and those are all the questions for that exam. If you have a 50 question exam, then those will be your 50 questions. If you have a 50 question exam, but you wanted to choose 50 questions out of 100 questions, that big bank, that big box, will have all of those questions mumbo jumbled around in there. This allows you to reuse the questions in another quiz, because you can always pull from the banks, or in another course. You can move the question banks from course to course so that you could pull them from there. This is great for a cumulative quiz. It's great if you want to have different versions of an exam, version A, version B, version C. So these banks really help you to stay organized. One of the things that's really important is your naming convention. If you have 100 questions and it's covering 6 chapters, then you've got a lot of questions and you need to sort of identify where they're coming from so that you can select the ones that you want. So question groups are sort of like having a file inside that box of questions. And that file might be chapter 3. And then you pull all of the questions from chapter 3 into that file, which is a question group. So it's a smaller organizational structure within a question bank. It's usually focused on a specific standard or content, and it allows for these randomized question options. So if you want to randomize your questions, you'll have to create these question groups from your question bank. And again, this is just an overview. If you need more help, we have resources at the end of the slide, and we also will help you your IDs if you just give us a call. So let's talk a little bit about some best practices. Many of you have not taught online before, and you're stepping out there and taking a risk. I hear wonderful things are happening. And giving an exam online might make you feel anxious, and your students might feel anxious. Remember, they signed up for a face-to-face course, and now they're in the virtual world. So we want to make sure that we give you some tips and tricks that will help you to succeed and your students to succeed. So time. The rule of thumb is to take the test yourself, multiply it by 4. The other idea to think about with time is if you have a lengthy and very detailed final exam, maybe it's 50 questions, 100 questions, an hour and a half, chances are that there'll be some sort of blip in somebody's internet or a couple of somebody's internet, and they'll contact you completely freaked out. And the only option you have at that point is to reopen the exam for them. And then they have the option to retake the entire exam. So a better idea, if you have a longer final exam, is to break it up into parts. Maybe break it up into 4 parts, 25 questions each, 30 minutes each. Then if a student has a blip in their internet during part 3, you can open part 3 for them again to do, but they won't be able to go back to part 1 or 2, and they won't be able to access part 4. So it really keeps that specific content area away from the student being able to do it again. So just something to think about for time. randomize questions or shuffle answers. So these are two different options. If you shuffle answers, then usually your questions will be in the same order every time. And this is a good idea if you're asking questions about processes, a cycle, or a time period, so that it makes sense and builds on itself. You can shuffle the answers, and that will help keep the rigor up. If you're just assessing sort of isolated facts or concepts, then you'll create those question groups and you can randomize the questions. And that way, students might get all different questions and each of them may have a completely different test. So again, you have these two options depending on the content that you're assessing. When do you reveal questions and answers? This is such a hard question to answer, but what I usually ask is sort of what's your goal for the assessment? If your goal for the assessment is summative and you're just measuring how much the student knows at this time, then chances are you'll only reveal to them what answers they got wrong. If it's a formative exam and you're expecting that students will have another attempt, then it's a good idea to let them know what they got wrong and their score. And then after the quiz is closed, they can see the correct answers. So for summative, it's fine just to give them their score or let them see what they got wrong. For formative, they may have a couple of attempts, so you want to make sure that they see what they got wrong right away and that they see the correct answer after the exam closes. Accommodations. You'll probably have a lot of students, or at least several students, who have accommodation needs. And when you're in class face-to-face, those are a lot easier. But Canvas does a really good job of helping with that. And so here are a couple of ways that you can give students extra time or extra attempts.
Another best practice is to make sure that you accommodate students. Even if you're not in a face-to-face class, you can still make accommodations for your students. So I'm going to show you two ways to accommodate students who need a little extra time or who need an extra attempt. So you go ahead and click on your quiz that you created. And this quiz is already published and already created. You go back in to moderate this quiz. And these are my students here. And my student number 2 training, when I click on that pencil, it says everyone gets 2 attempts, but my student gets an extra attempt because I have that paperwork saying that he needs that extra attempt. So this is extra attempts, not total attempts, extra attempts. So if everyone gets 2, my student is going to get 1 more attempt. Okay? And then this student gets extra time. Everyone gets 20 minutes. And this student, she gets 50% more time. So my student is going to get 10 extra minutes. Again, you don't want to put in here the total time. You want to just put in the extra time on every attempt. So my student who gets 50% more gets 10 extra minutes. The other thing that you might want to let students know about is the 0. The 0 shows up for some reason when you set any kind of an accommodation, and it sort of freaks them out because they're nervous as it is. And I always explain to them that's just a placeholder, and as soon as they take the quiz or exam, their score will pop in there, so not to worry about it. Okay, so those are 2 really great ways that you can accommodate students in your class in an online exam.
All right, so those are 2 ways to help students be successful in your class. We're going to talk briefly about academic integrity. There is a lot of literature and resources for you to look at about academic integrity. We're going to just sort of fly over it and give you an overview. So our philosophy is that we'd like to prevent rather than punish. So time-wise, you can prevent academic cheating, or you can support academic integrity by making sure that that timetable is really tight. If students are not using their notes, it's a summative exam, they're only taking it once, make the time really tight. Either they know it or they don't. If it's an open book, open note test, then you want to make sure you give them the luxury of time and maybe even a second attempt. Attempts. Again, think about how many times you want them to take the exam to demonstrate mastery. If it's summative, probably one time. If it's formative, maybe 2 or 3. So again, think about how many times should they be taking it in order to show mastery. If they take it 10 times, are they showing mastery, or are they just sort of learning from the quiz? And is that something that's okay with you? So again, these are all the questions to ask yourself. Will you shuffle answers? So shuffling answers is a very helpful strategy for promoting academic integrity. Students are unable to tell other students that the answers are A, B, C, C, D, because the answers are constantly shuffling. So that's a really easy way to prevent cheating from students. You can also randomize questions. Again, this adds another layer of rigor where questions are maybe they're not even on that test. So not only are they randomized, but if you have a large group of questions and you're only choosing 5 from 25 questions, students may not even get the same questions. So that's another wonderful way to prevent cheating on these exams. Again, revealing questions and answers is a really important decision to make. It does not help prevent cheating if you reveal questions and answers too soon. Then students have the answers and they can give them to other students. So be very purposeful in that. We also have 2 software applications that can help you. One of them is Respondus Lockdown Browser. And you can see here, Respondus Lockdown Browser locks the student browser. It's a software that they need to install on their computer. And they are unable to surf around on the web. There's a modified toolbar you can see at the top there. The controls are all disabled. There are no links, and all the features and applications are blocked. So they can only see their screen. There are, of course, pros and cons to everything. So Respondus Lockdown Browser, it does offer a certain level of security, and it doesn't require any additional technology, which is really nice at this point for students who didn't even sign up for an online course. The cons are that it certainly blocks the browser that they're using for their computer, but there's nothing preventing them from picking up their phone or their iPad and surfing along on that. The other issue is that they need a strong, consistent internet connection, and if your exam is lengthy, maybe an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, there can be blips in the system, and then it's really hard to get them back on and to figure out what happened. The other software we have is Respondus Monitor. This adds another level of security. It's the camera. So students have a webcam connected to this software application. They show their ID, they have their picture taken, and as they take the exam, there's a virtual proctor who watches them. And then flags, you can see the flags here, when any suspicious behavior is observed. And then you can go back through and see what was happening here. She's missing from the frame, there's a different person in the frame, there's multiple people in the frame, so it really gives you an idea of what's going on, and you can make your judgment from there. Respondus Monitor also has its pros and cons. It's very secure. You know that the student taking the exam is the student who's enrolled in the course. Students are monitored, and they have no options to look around or use another device. The cons are that students are required to have a webcam. They may or may not have a built-in webcam, and at this time, webcams are back ordered all over the country, so that's something to think about. Again, students need a consistent and strong internet signal. If you're having a lengthy exam, maybe an hour, hour and a half, again, it's easy to have an interruption during that time. And then it's really hard for them to get back on again and start again. It's a lot of stress. And there's also a cost associated with the service. So that's just a little bit about your online options for giving your final exams. If you want to know more, dive deeper, please go to this URL and you'll see a whole list of directions and resources and videos for you. I hope that you found this helpful.